Before we talk about anything here, we first need to talk about these indigenous Nenets people and who they are. Nenets are considered to be one of Russia's indigenous people living in the far north with aspects similar to those of other Arctic tribes such as the Inuit people in Canada. Nenets are part of the Samoyedic ethnic group found in the tundra of northern Russia. For a bit of context, Samoyedic people first originated about 1,000 years ago in southwestern Siberia, which is still located in modern day Russia. The Samoyedic people then spread out north into the less populated Arctic Circle, where a lot of their descendants, such as the Nenets, can be found today. These people are nomadic, and due to their nomadic lifestyle, they span a very large region reaching from the White Sea in the west to the tiny peninsula in the east. The region in which the Nenets live is a mix of both barren landscapes and taiga forests, with settlements spread out hundreds of miles away from each other. There are little animals to talk about in the region, with a few mammals fit to survive such inhospitable conditions being Arctic foxes, lemmings, polar bears, and reindeer. As for why they settled this region, it is hard to say, but it could have to do with their affinity for reindeer herding in the vast unpopulated region, which is what the Nenets people are mostly known for. A great extent of this region is covered by various lakes and flat land that is prime for reindeer grazing, as the only plants that grow on this earth in permafrost are mosses and lichen. Although the region is very good for grazing reindeer, the extreme conditions of the north do not make life easy either. The Nenets are under constant pressure from the changing environment around them. Their culture of reindeer herding is also completely affected by the environment, as herding routes can be slowed down by quick snowmelt during the spring, causing marshy conditions that affect the ability of reindeer to transport their equipment into grazing fields. And if anything affects the Nenets the most, it is the reindeer themselves, as they use the reindeer for almost everything, including food, clothing, shelter, and transportation. Even with the ensuing climate crisis, there is a very large shift in herding routes as permafrost begins to melt and marshier marshes during the spring begin to become the norm.
So, what exactly are the beliefs of the Nenets? The Nenets have a shamanistic and animistic belief system, which means that they believe in an unseen world of gods, demons, and ancestral spirits responsive only to the shaman, and that all objects, places, and creatures possess a distinct spiritual essence. This in turn stresses respect for the land and resources. The Nenets had a clan based social structure, which means they were united by kinship and descent. Kinship based groups may have a symbolic ancestor where the clan shares a common ancestor and is the symbol for the clan's unity. Clans in indigenous societies tend to lean more towards being endogamous, which means only members could marry one another. The Nenets have sacred items such as bearskins, religious figures, coins, and among other things which they would place in a holy sleigh that they would use during migrations. The contents of the sleigh are reserved for special occasions like religious rituals or sacrifices, but only esteemed elders are allowed to unpack the sleigh.
The Nenets are an indigenous tribe which rely on reindeer for their way of living. The population is divided into two parts: nomads who have lived the same way for hundreds of years, and Nenets who have chosen to settle in villages alongside the Russians. They have lived on the Yamal Peninsula for centuries, and the meaning of Yamal is edge of the world. The tribes followed the lunar months, with names usually relating to reindeer herding. Nomadic Nenets live in conical reindeer hide tents called chums. They wear reindeer fur jackets, gloves, hoods, and boots, which women sew every summer. Their lassos and ropes are made from reindeer rawhide, while their handmade sledges are made with wood and without the presence of metal or nails. When moving camp during summer and winter pastures, men ride on one sled drawn by reindeer and direct them with a wooden pole called kore. On the other hand, women and children drive trains of 6 or 7 sledges, which referred to as argish, which is pulled by 4 reindeer in the front and 2 for the rest of the sledges. Their favorite meal consists of reindeer meat and blood, which is consumed raw. The Nenets have the ability to instantly recognize dozens of different types of reindeer. There are hundreds of sacred sites in Yamal, ranging from natural objects such as hills and rivers to piles of antlers and skulls of sacrificed reindeer and so on.
Politics. As a society led by elders, they had a clan-based social structure. Their form of decision-making and organization, based on kinship and the importance of their community's unity and survival, made them a strong society in the freezing environments. Contact with Russians in the 11th century, despite there being a few military and tax-collecting raids, their contact was mostly peaceful. Connected by private fur traders who respected the Nenet culture and had no interest in defeating them, the relationship went well. But it is likely that both sides believed they were ripping each other off. The Russians gave the Nenet some worthless metal objects in exchange for the Nenet giving the Russians some worthless fur. Both parties believing they had given nothing and received a fortune. Unfortunately, this fruitful relationship would end. The millennium-old tribe would soon suffer after the Russian Revolution in 1923. The Nenets culture mourned due to the strict Soviet policies set in place that attempted to force the Nenet people to settle down permanently. Many herders moved north, while many of those that remained were deprived of their reindeer. Nenets people had to transition to small-scale herding. Although the Nenet herders were greatly affected, the Nenet culture took a big blow with this policy. It was in the change of the male societal role. Previously in the tundra, the male had the very important task of herding the reindeer. However, once the Nenets had to transition away from the tundra, men found that they had lost their role.
When talking amongst themselves, the Nenets speak a language that is not related to Russian, but is in the same family as Estonian or Finnish. The Tundra Nenets dialect is the main language of the tundra. Without fluent Russian, proper contact with the markets would be impossible. There are two main divisions in the language between Forest Nenets and Tundra Nenets, with the Tundra Nenets further divided into 11 sub-dialects that are all mutually intelligible. From the late Stalin period on, all children were put into the Soviet boarding schools, where Russian was the primary language for this reason. Almost every Nenets person under the age of 50 will speak fluent Russian. The enforced attendance of boarding school came as something of a shock in those early days as families resisted the policy. Today, boarding schools have become part of the usual Nenets life cycle, and parents are supportive of the opportunities that education provides, such as the ability to make a choice between living in the tundra or remaining in a town. As for making connections to the core theme, it is possible that outsiders can, to the extent, learn the language and speak the knowledge held by the Nenets cultural group, as there are a few Nenet grammar books. This way, the indigenous people develop to support the recording, preservation, and protection of the traditional knowledge. Tools. As mentioned, their geographical advantage is that their whole economy is based off reindeer, as they are traded, plausible income for the tribe, food, clothing, tools, transportation, and more as they migrate for more than 1,000 kilometers across the tundra every year. They stick to a very primitive form of hunting as they catch fish with rods and nets and use stone weapons. However, don't let that deceive you, as they too have modern day weaponry. Almost every herder carries a gun that comes in extreme handy for protection the herd from the predators. Medicine. The Nenets have made some medical technological advancement to treat diseases, visible injury, and even mental illness. When dealing with skin irritation, one of the most archaic methods is searing. Searing means that the definite points on the skin are irritated with a piece of smothering shaga. A burn follows and a blister appears. The Forest Nenets say that such points used to be known by virtually everybody, especially the elderly. When having internal or mental diseases whose cause was incomprehensible to the Forest Nenets, they turned to the help of the shamans, who performed the role of healers, scaring off the illness, bringing spirits along with carrying out other functions. The shaman's performance is known as the Kamlani, and it took place in the evenings, in half darkness, next to the fireplace, by the sounds of the drum, and continued for several hours. As a rule, Kamlani was accompanied by the shamans falling into a trance. It was said that the rhythmic drumming, incantations, singing, and the funneling smell of the burning legume were supposed to help to stave off from the patient that deliberately plots of the evil spirits.
The Nenets people nomadic lifestyles under serious threat, namely from the consequences of climate change and the influx of oil and gas drilling in the Yamal Peninsula. In recent years, the Yamal Peninsula and the Arctic as a whole have faced strain due to melting permafrost and increasing annual temperatures. While climate change is a global issue, Russia is warming almost 2 times faster than any other part of the world. The environmental changes that the region will experience pose challenges for the Nenets' way of life. As mentioned, the Nenet tribe heavily relies on reindeer as they encompass their main food source, means of transportation, and culture. Ice has begun to melt earlier and freeze over later in the year, and as such, herders are forced to change traditional migration patterns. Changes in vegetation across the peninsula due to increased temperature are detrimental as they are the only food source for reindeer. The Nenet people also rely on fish from lakes around them. The melting permafrost has led to freshwater lakes draining, causing a decrease in the supply of fish. The discovery of oil and gas reserves in the Yamal Peninsula has led to increasing contact between the Nenet people and the outside world since 1970. The changes in infrastructure that come with oil and gas drilling have had consequences on the Nenets' livelihood. The construction of railroads and pipelines can cut off traditional migration routes and sacred sites. Railroads have caused physical damage to reindeer, resulting in broken legs, and they can also limit access to reindeer pastures. Increasing activity from such industries has caused land on the peninsula to become private, making land available to the Nenets more scarce. However, there has been a benefit from the presence of oil and gas industries, as Nenet people can now participate in trade with workers. This trade has also spread the Nenets' knowledge about the tundra and migration routes. The future of the Yamal Peninsula is uncertain, especially with the changes that have occurred and the ones that could still happen due to climate change and oil and gas drilling. The Nenets need a healthy environment and access to pastures if they are to survive and continue their way of life. They have proven to be adaptable and have adapted to social and political challenges that they have faced. If the Nenets and their culture cannot be preserved, their unique knowledge about the Yamal Peninsula and herding will be lost.